Hey there! So this is my Marauders box. It is a simple 4-inch box, so it is literally just 4 inches by 4 inches by 4 inches, and it is made of 2 layered cutouts. The main body of the box are these 4 pieces. That's the bottom, and this guy is the lid. I solemnly swear I am up to no good. And then these are literally just placed on the underside of those pieces, and they're going to be stained a much darker color. So these are going to be stained a really, really dark brown, while these are just a natural wood and finished, so it gives it real contrast. Basically, this cutout piece, the background will be really dark, and that'll make the foreground really pop. But anyway, we've got the dog for Padfoot, got Prongs, Mooney, and Wormtail, Marauders. So let's cut it. This one goes pretty quick because it's only cut lines, no etching or anything else, just straightforward box. After that, I've got to go through and sand the surface of each piece smooth with a radial hand sander. First thing I do is apply a coat of stain to each of the inner pieces with a foam brush, and then I wipe it away with a rag. If you don't wipe the extra away, it'll be rough and tacky to the touch, even after it dries. Plus, it'll take a lot longer to dry. Coming back sometime later now, and the stain is fully dried. And now I am going to apply polyurethane to all of the inner pieces. My method for the outer box might seem oddly ordered since I'm putting all the finishing on before I've actually assembled the box. But I do it this way because it's proven to be the fastest way to get the results I want. Once done with the inner panels, I move on to applying it to each of the outer box pieces. They're staying a natural birch wood color, so nothing else has to be done to them beforehand. In order to get the really high gloss shine that I'm after, it's much better for each piece to be able to dry flat and level. This reduces the risk of pooling and ripples. If I assembled the box before I did the polyurethane, I would have to do each of the 5 sides separately for each and every coat, and that would waste a ton of time. When I tried it in the past, I always tended to get impatient and I would usually try to do multiple sides at once, and this inevitably resulted in drips and pooling. So I just kind of started doing it this way and I found it worked well. Once the first coat of poly has dried on all of the pieces, it is time to sand them again. This time I sand with a pretty high grit paper. It's 600 grit. The first coat of poly soaks in and fills all the wood's pores, and it leaves behind a solid but rough layer on top of it. In order to get the high gloss shine I'm after, I have to sand that layer smooth. And with the 600 grit paper, that's actually pretty simple. Now we're on to the second coat of polyurethane for the outer pieces. And here's a close-up to demonstrate the different stages we're at. So at this point, the outer pieces have gotten sanded twice and polyed twice. They're at a pretty high gloss already. In fact, sometimes I leave things right where this is. But the inner pieces have only been polyed and sanded once. So this is before sanding the second time. Since the poly I'm using is a high gloss polyurethane, you can already see some reflection and shine in the surface, but it's rough. So I hand sanded this part, again with a pretty high grit sandpaper. The hand sandpaper I've got only goes up to 400, but you can definitely get it higher. And now for the second coat of polyurethane on the inner panels. Very shiny. Of course, right now it's also wet, so of course it is. Rinse and repeat until all 5 pieces are done. And now I assemble. I'm just using regular wood glue here and a simple toothpick in order to apply it into the tiny notches. Wipe down the edges since glue inevitably oozes out, and a couple rubber bands to hold it together while it sets. So this is the point where things get a little more complicated. I could totally stop right now and just glue the darker panels on the inside and call it done. But I'm not satisfied with it as it currently is, so I'm taking it a step further. I'm grinding down the corners into a smooth, rounded bevel. The newly exposed wood won't have any finish on it, so this means some extra trouble after this step, but I think it's worth it in the end. Gotta do some hand sanding to smooth down the rough edges a bit. Here I'm going to fill in any of the gaps that are found between the teeth. There were some imperfections in the wood that I cut this out of, and in a few locations this led to the notches being a little thinner than they should be, so they actually left bigger gaps than normally. But usually I'd be doing this step anyways just because there are inevitably tiny spaces between the notches and I'd like to smooth those over anyway. I applied wood filler along all of the rounded edges and used my finger to smooth it out and to press it into all the tiny cracks. This is where having already polyed the sides actually comes in handy. The wood filler doesn't want to stick to the polyed surface so long as I wipe it away quickly enough. Using a paper rag, I made sure to wipe off all of the unwanted wood filler right away. Finally, I got a paper rag wet and went over the surface cleaning up all of the unwanted bits of dried glue and filler that had been left behind. And now we're at the point where I start to deal with those rough, unpolyed edges. This first pass, I'm aiming to only get poly on the exposed wood. After applying the poly along the edges, I go in with a paper rag and wipe and smooth away any of the places where the poly has gone over the previously polyed surface so as to not leave any obvious line. Once that poly has dried, I go over and sand the edges to make sure they're smooth to the touch. And at this point, I also decided that I was going to go ahead and do a third coat of poly over the entire thing. So I went in and I sanded each of the sides with 400 grit sandpaper. Here is where I force myself to be patient and I coat each of the sides one at a time and allow them to sit and dry flat and level before moving on to the next one. When all of this is done, the 6 sides of the cube have 3 coats of poly each. Well, the edges technically only have 2, but you really can't tell. The edges were never going to be glossy no matter what, and they are a little darker even if they're a lot lighter than they were beforehand. They are smoothed over and they are smooth to the touch, and it is much less distracting than those harsh notches and the pointed edge from before. So it's finally time to turn our attention back to the inner panels. I applied wood glue to the underside of the lid, put the dark panel in place, and I held it with clips. First, a quick test to make sure I know which way to line up the pieces. And now I apply glue to the inner sides. Here I am smoothing on the wood glue using a stick, putting the inner panels into place, clipping them so that the glue can dry. And that's it! I'm done! It's a simple little box, but when it's all finished up nicely, I think it's really cool, and I really like the design concept. I can also imagine doing a version where instead of inner wood panels, I would actually just apply wax paper to the inside, and then I could place a little LED tea light inside it. It could make a neat little desk lamp in that way. Not sure if there's much interest in something like that though. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this and maybe even learned some techniques or ideas to try yourself. If you got any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave them down in the doobly-doo. I have an Etsy store. You can find the link down in the bottom for that. It's also listed right here to the side. Subscribe if you'd be interested in more videos like this, and check out my channel for others I've made before. Anyway, thanks for watching, and don't forget to be awesome. Bye-bye.